Thanks for the year of free rent in Brooklyn. So a friend and I move into this newly renovated apartment in Brooklyn. It's nice enough, but just about every one of the 14 units has some sort of weird problem. One unit had the hot and cold water mixed up, flush a few times and get a heated toilet. One unit none of the outlets are grounded. One unit there are gaps around the windows. The problem in our unit was a leak in the air conditioner lines. The leak was probably at the roof, but we ended up with no AC. We call them and it takes a month to get someone. He refills the lines and a week later the problem comes back. We spend the summer getting the system topped up every week. At the end of the summer they decided that our repairs, and all of the neighbors, were getting too expensive. So they send us bills. Our bill was in the tens of thousands of dollars. Recharging that system weekly must have been expensive. They also start trying to charge every unit for any infraction. Like $100 for every unit for a single scrap of paper found in a hall. The tenants all get together to have a little meeting. It turns out that they never got a certificate of occupancy for the building. The city had it on the books as a furniture warehouse. So collectively we all just stopped paying them. Rent, fines, fees, nothing. We retain a lawyer and just live there. The company tried to get us out by cutting lighting and other services. We contacted the lawyer. The company would get fined, and we'd get our lights back. They tried to change the main lock once but we let the locksmith know what was going on so he stopped. They didn't try it a second time. The first floor of the building was an off-track betting parlor. They were particularly noisy and obnoxious. So one resident called the health department over a moldy loaf of bread we found in the basement. One of my best memories was watching a bunch of guys in hazmat suits clear out the betting parlor so they could run tests. Eventually they try to get the certs. But to do that they need to do inspections with the drywall removed. They tried to do it while we lived there and the lawyer fought it for not being in a livable state. Finally they realized they needed us out. If they got the CFO while we were still there, we'd owe back rent. They take us to court to get evictions. Lawyer gets everything pushed back as far as he can. But finally we go to city court. Lawyer points out that they are trying to evict 14 units. But you can't evict more than 10 at a time. Court ejects the case. I don't think their lawyer gets a single word in. So now we get a county court date for an ejection instead of an eviction. Again. Lawyer pushes it out as much as he can. But eventually we go. Court agrees to eject us all, but sees the evidence of lighting and lock tampering. Asks our lawyer what would be a reasonable time frame. Lawyer asks for 4 months. Judge gives us 6. Everyone stays until the last month. At the end of it all, we got to live in a newly renovated apartment in a trendy area of Brooklyn for free for a little over a year. I told you to take me off of your chain emails, you old creep. Sorry for the mobile formatting and long read. TLDR at the end. I have a huge, broken family that's unnecessarily close and totally dysfunctional. My great step uncle, let's call him John, is a constant feature in my life, as well as a cast of other characters who could all get their own posts. John is an asshole. He's 90, but he's still sharp as a tack, which he uses to push his bizarre views on everyone he meets. Forever. His weapon of choice is the chain email, which he uses to great effect. John has used this chain email to do everything from push his healthcare plan he wrote, spoiler, no one is covered, to his crackpot inventions for perpetual energy to talking about personal family details to spreading racist and sexist ideas to everyone in his Rolodex. I'm not talking racist and sexist 2019, let's debate this racist and sexist. I'm talking women should be seen and not heard and black people were better off as slaves. Nice guy. After 3 years of receiving these, he got my email from my LinkedIn profile. I begged him to remove me from the list, as I was getting email from him daily and I'd rather not block him. He refused, saying that he was opening my mind. I was too sensitive and that if I didn't like them I didn't have to read them. Last week, he decided to send me and my brother a rough draft of his book through LinkedIn direct message, asking for comments. He doesn't want comments. I found this strange. Why not send it to the email list? Well, I decided to read the book and it turns out that the reason he didn't send it to his list is because it is the most bizarre, sickening commentary on sexual harassment I have ever read. He wanted me to validate if it was normal before he sent to his publisher. He doesn't have one. My little brother was so upset by it that he told me he never wanted to speak to John again. To avoid boring you with the details, his thesis is that women want to be abused. John has been divorced 4 times. The most interesting part was a little biographical section about things he had done that would constitute a sexual harassment in 2019. Not little stuff, bad stuff, like a secretary who worked for him. He's a doctor who repeatedly told him no and actually quit the job because he wouldn't stop trying. Told us a humorous anecdote. He had another in there about trying to hook up with one of his patients. They always tell on themselves. So, I gave him what he asked for. I gave a full, scorched earth review of his manuscript, pulling out key quotes and burning it to the ground for being anachronistic garbage. I paid careful attention to the biographical details, calling out the harassment for what it is. Could I have sent it to him over LinkedIn DM? Sure. Did John pay me that courtesy when he used the chain email list to tell everyone he knew that my dad was out of work, causing great embarrassment? No. So, I did what John would have done. I replied all to his chain email list with my full review. Everyone from his neighbor to his kids to his ex-wife to his dentist got to see who the old man really is. While I doubt anyone was surprised, he's super ass grabby and creepy. Seeing it in his own words surprised a lot of people. The response was pandemonium. All sorts of people started arguing over the harassment. Mostly furious with John. Pleasantly surprising to me. I have since been removed from the chain email list, along with my brother. He's 90 and lives alone in the middle of nowhere. He won't face any consequences, but I'm really looking forward to seeing John at Passover now. TL. Dr. Creepy Old Uncle abuses massive chain email list for years. I blow him up for his past harassment on the same list. How I inadvertently brought down a crime ring. Strap in. This is fairly long. This all happened in 2008. I was 18. I had just gotten a job at a new restaurant basically next door to me the summer after I graduated high school. The owner of the restaurant, we'll call him Ken, was an immigrant from Syria, relevant later in the story. Ken had spent most of his life in the States managing restaurants in Boston, but moved to our area to help some of his family with their struggling business. In the beginning, things were going well. We had a steady flow of customers and some pretty good food. About a month in, however, things shifted. Ken bought a new Mercedes and house. I thought nothing of it, he just moved to the area 2 months prior. Then things got bad. He closed on his house and made his employees move everything for him. Servers, dishwashers, bussers, everyone. He said if we didn't, we'd be fired. So we did. He then started taking vacations and leaving his head chef, who has never even been in a professional kitchen before this job, in charge. He was overwhelmed and just told us all to duck off when we had an issue. Fast forward 4 months. Ken is now not paying employees. We started losing a lot of help. It's almost the end of summer and in a few weeks I'd be quitting for college anyway. So I stuck it out. I started working 13-16 hour shifts 6 days a week, which promised good money. I was at this point promoted to head of house and got a raise, even though I wasn't being paid. I worked about 3 weeks that way, around 84-96 hours a week at $15 an hour. I then learned that one of my only friends there, a Mexican here on a work visa, had not been paid for over a month. He told me he was afraid of quitting because he didn't want to lose his visa like Ken told him would happen. Capital I was livid. I took my uniform off and stormed to the front of the restaurant where Ken was. It was our dinner rush, which at this point meant 1 or 2 tables of people who'd probably never come back because the food was garbage. I demanded payment for the last 3 weeks, around $3,600, on the spot. He blew up, in front of everyone. Normally I'm passive and would back down, but not today. I was pissed. I told him that if he didn't pay me, I was calling the health board, the tax office. We were all getting paid under the table and no taxes were being filed on the business, and the police and have the place shut down the next day. He paid me. I gave the money to our dishwasher. He needed it more, and told him to take the rest of the night and tomorrow off. The next day, I called the immigration office in our area and explained our dishwasher situation to see if they could help. I set up a meeting with them for him. I picked him up and away we went. When we get there, they asked if I could just fill out a statement to add to his file. Sure. I wrote everything. A few days later, I hear sirens. The restaurant is basically next door. Remember, I look outside and see Ken being handcuffed and put in the back of a squad car and the health department bolting the doors. I walk over to see what was going on. Ken was previously being investigated for fraud and my statement was the evidence that set the investigation over the edge. I read in the paper some months later about it. In the raid, they found his ledger which showed how much money he had been skimming from the business. Over 6 figures. And he was charged on that. Ken was getting deported back to Syria and the rest of the sister restaurants were getting shut down pending further investigation. They never reopened. So this is the story about how a fresh 18-year-old inadvertently brought down a minor crime ring in my area all because I was pissed they took advantage of a friend. Landlord refuses to fix broken windows. Costs him thousands of dollars and his job. Keeping things vague in this post on purpose. My girlfriend and I moved into a house that had several broken cracked windows held together with tape. The rest of the house was great and in perfect condition. The landlord promised to fix them ASAP. He kept promising to fix them month after month, with no action being taken. After 6 months I began recording his phone calls and had recorded him threatening to have us evicted if we got a lawyer, which is highly illegal in my state. Landlord cannot retaliate against a tenant for getting a lawyer. So, we got a lawyer and provided him with the recordings and pictures of the windows. We also contacted the city code enforcement depot and reported some minor code violations that we noticed throughout the house. At this time, I worked for a medium-sized payroll and corporate compliance company who happened to do the payroll for the company that my landlord was the president of. Because of this, I could see exactly which laws he was breaking due to state and federal human resource and labor law regulations. For example, he did not have a company handbook, labor board posters displayed, and didn't have various federal compliance reporting measures in place. Being in the industry, I knew the minimum fines for the slew of violations his company had would be about $730K due to the length of time they had been operating without these requirements in place for his business. So I reported his company to the appropriate regulatory committees, knowing perfectly well that when it hit the fan, they would look to him for answers. I didn't hear anything regarding his company violations for some time while the legal negotiations continued between my lawyer and his. In the meantime, the code department issued a $10K fine for the code violations, including the windows, and required him to fix the windows. Now, anyone who knows Windows knows you shouldn't replace one window at a time, especially when you have numerous bay windows in the house. This required him to replace windows in the entire house, which ended up costing $6K as there are lots of windows in the house. The legal negotiations ended after the windows were replaced. In my state, due to a clause listed in the lease, I was able to bill the landlord for my legal fees to fight him on this issue. At $5K, we are now at $21K USD in costs incurred by the landlord for these windows. A couple months go by and I notice he's no longer on the company payroll. Again, I worked for the company that did his payroll and compliance for his company. When I called his company to verify we shouldn't be paying him, I was informed there were organizational changes due to fines brought against the company for a number of violations. When all was said and done, the landlord paid $21K out of pocket directly for the windows, and it cost him his job and his company at least $730K in federal and state violations. It didn't cost me $1 in the end. I couldn't have been happier with the outcome. Edit. Wow. My first silver. Thank you. Edit 2. 2 silvers? Thank you. Edit 3. My first gold 2. Thank you. Edit 4. My first platinum. Thank you. Thank you everyone for all of your comments and awards.
No school principal post for you. My first post here, it was in high school, 10th grade USA, so I am about 16 and recently made friends with a guy named Mario from a class project we were given. Background, I grew up in the inner city during the 1990s, so figured if you were in DC, New York, or any familiar East Coast city. Anyhow, since this was public school, teachers and admins don't really care about us other than making sure we are not stabbing and shooting each other. Since me and Mario came from low income and welfare background, we really didn't have nice things. I did my share of shame, but I never stole from anybody. One day we have a big school assembly for a speaker who survived a motorcycle accident. It was fun to get out of class for 2 periods. So at the end of the assembly, I was leaving and Mario called out to me and asked to grab his jacket as he left it on the chair. Me, without thinking, grabbed it and gave it to him. A couple of weeks later, and I had to go to the counselor to get some records for my PSAT. The vice principal (VP) at that time was there as her office was next to my counselor, and she stopped me and asked about a stolen jacket. I was scared of my mind because I did not steal anybody's jacket, and she told me I was facing expulsion for stealing another student's jacket. At this time, I was on track for some academic scholarship and was scared out of my mind about this. She brought me to the room where they kept troubled kids, and I was pointed out by another student as taking a jacket a while back, and then it dawned on it. Mario had me pass the jacket to him. I tried to explain the situation, that my friend said it was his, and so I grabbed it and gave it to him. I didn't know it was another student. I gave Mario name to sort out the situation, and he came clean and told the VP I didn't know. However, this VP didn't like me because of the fact that this dark skin was working towards winning this academic scholarship, usually a white student won. So what did she do? She told me to bring my mom in the next day. My mom did not speak English, by the way, and a punishment was to be handed. Not only did I get an ass beating when I got home, but now I needed to bring my mom to school, who did not even understand the situation. Without any way to defend myself, the VP without mercy suspended me for a week and put it on my record. I cried as I was so upset. This itch basically tried to duck up my life and rather wanted me to fall into the life of gangs and crime people of my kind were susceptible to. Long story short, I took the week off and came back ready to fight back towards winning the scholarship. Senior year, I win the scholarship anyway and got a 4-year ride for college and put the experience behind me. Or so I thought. 2 weeks before graduation, I was asked to sit on a selection committee for the vacated principal post. I was selected because of my studies and also personal background. Google Cambodia and you can imagine what my parents went through. There was a CV packet of a name. It was the name of the VP a couple of years back who gave me no leniency. I read her cover letter and she wrote about caring about students. Choices we make in admin roles have a profound effect on children. And all the garbage. Oh, and she wrote she knew the school very well and the students there. Game on itch. When she came in, she did not recognize who I was. So I played it coy and let her speak, and then it was time for us to ask questions. Guess what I asked? I asked her, if a student got into something my situation, would you punish the student to the max? And if she ever faced something like this before? The itch said, she would fully investigate, and if the student was unaware, was a good student, there would be no need to be that extreme. Also, she noted luckily she never had to face a situation like that. I then asked her, does she recognize me? She genuinely didn't, so I told the group what happened to me with her and gave them copies of reports she signed. Her face dropped and I don't recall what else happened, but the questioning continued until she was dismissed. In our deliberation, they were vouching for her, but I was adamant in my no vote and we end up giving the post to acting principal. Don't know what happened to her since, but Mario, last I heard, went back to Puerto Rico. And I went to college, grad school, now Abid, and interning as a civil employee. If you are still with me, thanks for reading. It has been a long day and my English should be much better. Oh well, public school. You want me to pay for your personal expenses? No thanks. In fact, you'll be paying for it. This is my first Reddit, so apologies if the formatting is wrong. So to begin, this story didn't happen to me, but I was a huge point of contention between the two parties. My mother and father. So, about 3 years ago, my parents got divorced. When they got divorced, however, my mother did not remove my father's name from her car's title. So, whenever she got into any sort of accident or needed repairs, she is not a very good driver. My mother would always send half or more of the bills to my father, who would just tear them up until he would just pay them. Now, after about 3 years of this, my father had had enough. She texted him a few days ago, saying she needed new tires for her car, which in her mind, he was going to pay for. Now, my father is a very patient and kind man. He has paid for every fee for my brother and I for the past 3 years without my mother's help and rarely complained or asked for money from her. However, she would always ask for money from him and he would yield most times. He texted her, saying he wouldn't pay for her personal expenses. She replied, sending pictures of medical bills for myself and my brother from the past year as well as a bill for a vacation that she took, saying he needed to pay for those too, which he already paid his half of the medical bills and had nothing to do her vacation. He texted her saying he wouldn't pay once again. She was furious over this. She then began to go off saying how he couldn't provide better for me. That she would claim me on her taxes this year, she wasn't supposed to. That would be violating their custody agreement, and how he was terrible and selfish for keeping both her children to himself. I moved out of my mother's place 3 weeks after they divorced. She was a slob and allowed grown men who a 14-year-old girl at the time, did not know into her home, and my brother didn't even want to live with her to begin with, so he didn't. She also stated that if he wanted his name off the title, he would have to give her money for it. Now keep in mind, when they divorced, my dad paid to have her name removed off of his car's title by himself. Anyways, while she went off about how selfish and horrible he was, she let it slip that she has a down payment ready for a new car. A down payment which was more than the cost of him purchasing new tires for her current car. She even threatened to put his name on the title for her new car. Here's where the revenge comes in. My father called the state, asking for a copy of the car's title to be mailed to him. Once he received it a few days later, it was go time. He called a towing business and had paid to get the car towed to his business lot, which was about a 30-minute drive from where we lived, an even longer walk from where my mother lived. She has no other form of transport. Then, he received several furious voicemails from my mother, who he now blocked, about how he stole her car and that she was calling the police on him for theft. Now, about 2 hours later, at my dad's business, a police patrol car shows up, asking him about the car in his lot, saying he ran the plates and it was reported as stolen. My dad then denied this, showing the officer the car title with his name on it in addition to hers. The officer then apologized for bothering him, he was working at the time, and left him alone. It's been about a day and a half. My mother has yet to get her car back and has had to call into work because she cannot get there. And my dad is speaking with his divorce lawyer about legal actions to have her remove his name from the title and get a restraining order from my crazy mother for both himself as well as my brother and I. Life is good. Update, holy moly. I'm glad you guys liked this. Anyways, my father got the money from her to remove the title and she has her car back. Unfortunately, my mother's been harassing me at my 2 jobs and on social media, so we're in the process of getting a restraining order now. Update 2, so we're going to court so my dad can get full custody of us and in turn, child support and compensation for all bills she hasn't paid that he has. I'm a little nervous, but I know that we got this in the bag. My dad says he wants to be sure she'll have to leave her $175,000 house. Love my dad. I'll let y'all know how this turns out. Pick on me and get away with it? Not even mom or dad can get you out of this timeout. My story, from 3 decades ago. I am the younger brother by 2 years and my older brother used to pick on me a lot. Typical kid stuff, but we were getting into our early teens and it was becoming nasty. Mainly I wanted it to stop, but I couldn't get him to leave me alone, and my parents had reached the point where they were just sick of us fighting. They didn't care much about the reasons. Both of us were getting in trouble if something happened. After starting one of these fights, my brother gets into his room and wedges the door shut with his body so I can't get to him. That gets me to thinking about how to get in there, and I stumbled onto my revenge while trying to push through the door. We lived in an old house, built in 1900s, with old-timey locks on each bedroom and bathroom door, the kind which had antique key like you see in old cowboy movies, loop on one end and a square tooth on the other. Only none of the locks had keys. The locks were also painted over with 85 years of paint and other garbage blocking them up. I got my hands on a bunch of old keys from some junk shops, approximately 50 at 15 cents per, and waited. One day while my brother and parents were out on the weekend, I took apart his bedroom door lock, carefully carving back old paint from the latch, freeing the mechanism and WD-40ing everything inside to make the mechanism move smoothly. It took about 2 to 3 weeks to get the time alone to pull this off, putting it all back together each time. I then spent another week in my closet with a multi-tool file carving away junk store keys until they fit his lock. I had used some of my repair time on the lock to identify the best ones to use. Once it all worked well, I just waited for my brother to pick a fight. Once again he hit me a couple of times and ran for his room. I chased him just slow enough that he could slam his door in my face. And I locked him in. I stashed the key in my room while he was figuring out what happened. My parents came upstairs yelling to cut it out, only to find my brother trapped in his room calling for help while I read books on mine. I have to say it was pretty great. Nobody could get him out without the key I made, and my brother was baffled at how I had pulled this off. I took the grounding with a smile and gave up the key after 10 to 15 minutes so my dad wouldn't break down the door. After the dust settled, I made sure my brother knew about the other 6 keys I had made in case he wanted to keep picking fights. It definitely shifted the dynamic with my brother after that. It sucked getting picked on so much back then, but everything worked out now that we are adults. He now asks me about how to fix things up or if I can make stuff for him. All's well that ends well. My grandpa destroys a wall and crazy neighbor pays for it. Okay, so not my revenge, so I DK if I am allowed to post. But this is really funny story constantly being retold to family members. Before I was born my grandpa had just retired and decided duck it I am going to live in a middle of a mountain that is in the middle of nowhere. He bought a piece of land far away from any city or village and started building a house. His only neighbors were an old lady and a crazy idiot. After half a year he decided to permanently move in there and started building more and more things to accommodate himself. One of the things he built were a wall around his property and an outdoor toilet. This will be important later on. During this time his crazy neighbor was trying to sell property. My grandpa offered to buy it from him but the guy declined, asking for 10 times more than my grandfather offered. They got into a sort of an argument and ended all communication. Now the crazy bastard was out to get my grandpa. He would call communal services and make police officers and inspectors come on a 2-hour ride for every possible thing he could. We are talking about stuff like leaving a dog without the leash in a walled-off backyard or having leftover building materials on road, which my grandpa also built. Before that they had freaking dirt road. Now my grandpa did not mind. But every time police was involved they had to go over the backyard belonging to the old lady since works were going on, and crazy neighbor sealed of a gate connecting his and my grandpa's property with garbage. It did not look nice, or smell nice, but my grandpa was busy with other stuff to keep removing it every night. Only for the bastard to rebuild it next morning. Even though my grandpa did not give a it, the lady did, and she was on my grandpa's side. So one day when the officers came she asked a couple of questions to these lovely people. She then contacts my grandpa. She learned 2 things. First of all, since the wall was built on my grandfather's land, he had all the rights to it. He could destroy it completely if he wanted. Second, filling a gate in the wall with it was illegal. But my grandfather did not have right to build a gate into someone else's yard without explicit permission either. And pursuing it in court would only end up with having to seal it off. She informs my grandpa about all of this and soon they hatch a plan. They wait for 2 to 3 months for heavy autumn rains to start drowning the land. Then old lady files a formal complaint about the smell of the garbage. My grandpa pleads guilty and signs off a document that legally forces him to destroy the gate and remove the garbage from it. Now the very same day my grandpa signs off on the documents. The biggest storms of year starts. It rained for 7 days before inspectors could come to remove the garbage and the gate. Now my grandfather had previously cemented 3 of the 4 drains that were built in the wall. This plus the mountain being steep resulted in wall acting like a dam for all the water that was coming in. Almost entire yard was filled with water, eventually even lifting everything up from the outdoor toilet my grandfather built. His neighbor tried everything he could to stop the inspectors from destroying that garbage-filled gate. He pleaded and pleaded, but he could do nothing. He did not own the wall, and he was the one making all the communal calls, and the inspectors grew to hate him. Furthermore, my grandfather had pleaded guilty, meaning that any form of complaint on the decision of the court from a third party was impossible and deemed invalid at this point. After the inspectors removed the gate, a small sea of it, construction materials and water poured into the yard of the asshole and ended up watching the water destroy his entire yard. All while my grandpa and nice old lady were drinking tea from her balcony. Today, while telling me the story he told me, I felt like God unleashing the flood upon the sinful world back then. Which made me chuckle because I know he is an atheist like me. Aftermath was even better. Needless to say, the guy needed to pay thousands to repair all the water damage and cleaning he had to do. All the while my grandfather's and old lady's house were completely untouched by any of it since they were on a lot higher ground. The best part is that since he admitted he was the one filling the gate with garbage to the inspectors, they made a note of that, and some time later he received a written order from the court that he had to repay my grandpa for any property damage because of that. He ended up going to court, losing after the old lady testified in my grandfather's favor and having to rebuild the gate that was destroyed along with all the court fees. The guy moved out as soon as he could, and from what the new owner said, he sold it for less than half of what my grandfather offered him. Edit, thanks for the gold. Kind stranger. Revenge 15 years in the making. This one came from my brother-in-law after a conversation that we had last night. They had a family friend. We'll call him John. That had a wage dispute with an old boss. We'll call him DB. For douchebag. John used to work for DB back in the 90s on a construction crew. DB was the general contractor. John was a good employee. But DB was a stingy penny pincher that was notorious for shorting wages and paying late. It was a terrible work environment. So of course, John quit. DB owed John $200 on his last paycheck and refused to pay it. John threatened to take DB to small claims court to recover his money. DB's response was, "Fine, sue me." So that's exactly what John did. John brought the case against DB in court. And guess who didn't show up for the hearing? That's right, DB ghosted. John won the judgment by default. John then took the judgment and recorded a lien on DB's house for the $200 he was owed. As you can probably guess by now, DB is an idiot, and never had a clue that John recorded the lien. 15 years later, it's 2007 and the housing market starts to crash. DB wants to get out from under his house and, lo and behold, discovers that no one wants to buy his house because of John's lien. DB calls John and berates him, threatens him, and does everything short of strangling him through the phone to try and get him to remove the lien. John doesn't budge an inch, and tells DB that the only way he's removing the lien is if he gets back his $200 plus additional terms. DB is furious, and after several more expletive-filled conversations, agrees to pay John off. He asks John where he can mail the check to, as John had moved several hours away. John says absolutely not. The only way he was going to accept the money was if DB hand-delivered payment to him in cash. The next day, DB drives 4 hours out to John's new home. John's terms on the payoff were $200 at 25% interest compounded monthly over the previous 15 years. For you math junkies out there, that's a grand total of $8,182.80 that DB handed over. John took the cash, gave his old boss a clear view of his middle finger, and shut the door in his face. He then happily removed the lien from DB's house. Should have just paid the man his $200 bucks when he had the chance. Edit 1, lien, not lien. Edit 2, for those that are asking, I wasn't as clear in the writing. John knew that his additional terms were not within his rights as a lien holder. $200 was all that was needed to pay the debt. John banked on DB's stupidity and knew he wasn't going to find out that John had no legal right to claim that much money. Won't pay rent or move out? Annual bug bomb time. This is a story about what my friend KP did to help his buddy get rid of a roommate who just wouldn't move out. What you have to understand is, KP is the sort of guy who will put far more effort into a scam than honest work would ever take. He lives for the flim flam. In grade school he had every puke ray and remote control fart box they sold. We spent our teenage years driving around to fast food restaurants and telling the manager that they got our order wrong in order to wheeze some free food. Or disconnecting the odometer on his mom's scooter so we could joyride undetected. KP's family was wealthy, but that didn't matter. His car's plates were always counterfeit. He was the guy who would hook up your cable. He ran a side business replicating of age stamps that all the local bars used. He ran a high schooler speakeasy in his spare bedroom. He forged a dealer's license to buy his RV wholesale. And to this day every time he walks into a restaurant he goes right over to the server's counter and grabs someone else's chicken fingers and brings them to the table. Nobody said these stories had to involve ethical people. He dropped out of college first semester to go to one of those get-rich-quick seminars in Vegas and actually got it rich with one of those legal scams. You know, the bounced check mini lien one, so needless to say he doesn't have to work, and has actually spent his time pursuing one grift or another. From diamond cutting to inventing a new kind of lawnmower. They never go anywhere because his interest dries up quicker than the $1,000 worth of dead fish in his saltwater aquarium. I wouldn't be surprised if right now he was soaking the labels off of some wine bottles. Or selling some counterfeit calamari. He lives for the flim flam. But he's also a volunteer firefighter. And that plays a small role. His buddy, Schlemazel, got into a year-long lease for a one-bedroom apartment. Shortly after that, he and his girlfriend got pretty serious. And they decided to buy a house. He subletted his apartment to a guy who I'll call the guy on our couch Gooch. Gooch didn't have a job and never paid rent. Ever. Schlemazel begged and pleaded and threatened. Nope, Gooch didn't bud. He didn't have a job. And rarely left the house. just smoked pot all day and played video games. Schlemazel was living with his girlfriend and trying to apply for loans. Unpaid rent would look bad on his credit. He appealed to the landlord to initiate an eviction. But the landlord said, "Your problem, duck you. Pay me." A few months went by and he's paying this guy's rent and getting a lot of empty promises and getting nowhere. So he calls KP. This is the sort of phone call KP lives for. He springs into action. First thing he does is buy one of those pre-made websites that he sets up like a fake exterminator company. He gets them a 1-800 number and routes it to Schlemazel's phone. Then he goes to Home Depot and buys Evict suits, masks, roach traps, and some of those little wand sprayers that exterminators use. He enlists the help of a friend, Mensch. Then he rents a U-Haul. He grabs a toy he has called a thermal imaging camera, or TIC, that firefighters use to find sources of heat in thick smoke. It looks like a very official piece of equipment. Then they suit up and knock on Gooch's door. "Annual bug bomb," they say. Gooch comes to the door in a thick haze of smoke. Eyes squinty. "Huh, annual bug bomb," they say. "Have you lived here a year?" They knew he hadn't. "Yeah, every year we gotta bug bomb your place. Here's our card. You can call the office if you want." It helped a little that, being a filthy stoner, Gooch did have a roach problem, so he lets them in and they start spraying the corners and scanning the walls with the TIC. "Yeah, you can see their tracks everywhere. You got roaches in here." At this point Mensch is taking long strips of roach traps and ripping them off the strip and frisbeeing them into the corners. But he's got gloves on and he's having trouble tearing them. Gooch is getting suspicious these guys are exterminators and this guy can't tear a roach trap off of a strip. In a stroke of genius, Mensch exclaims, "Ah, I hate when they give me the blue ones," and throws the strip down. They convince Gooch that he must vacate the apartment for 24 hours. "Go stay with a friend." "Oh, you have a cat? Well, the cat can't stay. You gotta take it." So as soon as the coast is clear the operation begins. They back the U-Haul up to the door, and flag down a passing big guy. "Hey, you wanna make $50 helping us move?" Then they proceed to move all of Gooch's stuff into the U-Haul. A guy like that, what does he have? Some dirty sheets on a futon mattress, a TV, a slab of canned beans and ramen packs, a litter box that hasn't been changed since the Nixon administration. When that's done, Schlemazel, who has been manning the phones, sweeps in with a digital camera and takes pictures of the empty apartment. He's scheduled an appointment with a locksmith, who arrives and changes the locks. They all head to a storage facility with the U-Haul and unload Gooch's stuff into a locker. Schlemazel takes a picture of that. 2. Schlemazel goes to Kinko's and prints out the digital pictures of the empty apartment and the full storage unit along with a sign. Gooch returns to the apartment the next day to find a sign on the door that says, "Your stuff has all been moved into storage. Meet me at the storage unit at this place and time with your back rent to get your stuff back." On the door is a picture of the empty apartment, and a full locker. His keys don't work. At the meeting time, Gooch shows up with the cops. He's called and told them that someone has stolen all of his stuff and is extorting him. KP explains the real situation to the police, and says that they may be interested in certain items among Gooch's stuff that resemble heavily used tobacco pipes and hookahs. The cops, realizing exactly what has gone down, shake their heads. They know they can't prove that the contraband is Gooch's. They say KP can't extort the back rent this way. Then they issue Gooch a summons for filing a false police report. Schlemazel never got his back rent, but he did get his subletter out. I got someone fired twice. Bit of a long one, but my first post, and it's fresh off the pot. So I've been working in advertising for about 8 years now. Back in my old agency, we hired someone new to handle digital for a couple of small-time clients as she was new to the industry. Let's call her EC, evil crap. She didn't last long as she had attitude problems and would regularly make major mistakes and repeat them. So after 6 months, I told her that it's not going to work out, but that we thank her for being with us, basically no hard feelings. I never burned bridges, and I was still kinda junior in my middle management career. A couple of years later I left that agency and started doing my own thing. But then settled as head of digital at a new agency that had a small client, SC, but one that had a big global name. Their retainer was pretty low, and I had told the managing director, MD, that it wasn't a client worth keeping if they wouldn't increase their retainer by at least 15%. But my agency insisted that they're a good name to keep. Whatever, I didn't invest too much time into it. A few weeks later the client hires a new digital manager, and it turns out to be EC. And she gives me this smirk in our first meeting. I'm not new in the industry so I don't really take it too seriously. But she tries to make life hell for my employees. constant angry emails, and unrealistic expectations, but in my face she was always nice. She would even send me private WhatsApp messages thanking me for the good work. But sending huge criticisms via email with her boss CC'd. She thought that just because she's my client I was scared or something? Anyway, fast forward a couple of months, and she sends an email to the MD, whom I directly report to, and says that I haven't given any care to the account, and that there are too many things going wrong, that I should be adding value to the account. I tell my boss that they only pay for 2 hours per month of my time, and that I'm giving them 1 day a week, more than generous, and that she is being unreasonable with her demands. Honestly, she's kinda choosing beggar, but that's another story. Anyway, my boss asks to be looped into emails moving forward, pissing me off, but whatever. After 3 days he sees how ridiculous it's getting and says to me, "I've had this account for 12 years. I'm not about to let EC ruin it. Do what you can to take her down." I comply. She didn't take into account that our contract ended in exactly 1 month from the moment I got the green light to screw her over. And if she didn't have an agency to take over the account, she would definitely be under serious scrutiny from her management. Her boss had no idea how much time I put into the account, and how much time the team has invested. So I make sure I keep timesheets, records, and rounds of feedback she's given. We had an agency review meeting 3 days before contract extension, and I present the 2019-20 strategy and contract with a 130% increase in the retainer. Her and her boss freak out and are like, "What? No way. How could you even present that?" I show her boss all emails, all WhatsApp conversations confirming what she wants to be delivered for the year, and say that we won't take them on as a client if they're not willing to pay what's worth. I even slipped in some of the nasty WhatsApps she sent to my employees where she said at one point, "Take it up with your boss if you don't like it." My MD started to freak out after the meeting and told me that he didn't expect me to do that. He was so nervous that he was about to lose an account that isn't even 5% of the company's revenue. 2 days later, they ask if we'd be willing to take the same retainer for less work, as the demands made by EC were not beneficial to the company and that they have let her go 4 months after hiring her. We agree, and move on. Ideally, we would have ended the relationship, and I would have freed time to win new businesses. But that didn't happen. I've since quit this job hoping to find EC somewhere else. Because third time's the charm XD. Boy hit me with chair, so my mom almost owned a daycare. This story happened when I was 6 years old, but my mom retells it so often that the details are ingrained. I went to daycare while my mom worked. The daycare had a large playground with a jungle gym, plastic lawn chairs for sitting, a slide, swings, sandbox, and playhouse. One day, a boy kept sliding down the slide without giving anyone else turns. I decided to take a turn as he reached the bottom. When I reached the bottom of the slide, the boy hit me in the right side of my face with a blue plastic lawn chair. I started crying and ran toward a teacher. The boy kept trying to make me be quiet, and pushed me. Now, the playground was covered with pebbles and sand, and I was wearing shorts, so I hurt my knees and hands. I already could barely see, and this made me cry louder. A daycare worker came over to me, admonished the boy, and cleaned up my hands and knees. I actually had bloody scrapes on my knees that needed bandages, my cut and bruise on my right cheek, and my right eye wouldn't open properly. **** All of this is important for what happened next. ***. My mom picked me up at the same time as most parents. When she saw my bandages and my injured eye, she got out of her car, stormed into the daycare and demanded to speak to the staff. She was yelling at the top of her lungs to find out who was responsible, what happened, and why she wasn't called about my injuries. The boy, we'll call him Kyle, and his mom were at the daycare. I told my mom that Kyle hit me with a chair. "Mom, who is Kyle?" I pointed at Kyle and his mom getting ready to leave. My mom stormed over, and although I don't remember the exchange between her staff and Kyle's mom, my mom made it clear that she would make them pay. My mom took me to the hospital, got photos taken, and called the police at the hospital to take a report and press charges against the daycare. My mom was serving in the U.S. Navy at the time. She had a lawyer the next morning. Mom called the local news and did an interview with me at her side. Parents started pulling their children soon after. The director of the daycare asked to sit down with my mom a few days later. My mom, her lawyer, and I sat in the office, and she made her terms clear. The daycare could pay for my injuries out of court, or the local news could cover the trial as they went to court. They settled for an amount that my mom refuses to disclose. My optometrist says to this day that my right eye is smaller than the left and that my right eye has worse vision. but the daycare closed the year after I got injured. The charming story of how a neighbor came to be jacked up. Language. This story isn't about me, but my dear old dad. Back in the day, he used to be a plumber. He then went on to join the military where he sustained various injuries, chemical exposure. Anyway, this happened during the time when he was fighting for his disability. On occasion, he would do side jobs just to get by. It was very painful, difficult work for him. But alas, the bills needed paid. At the time, he had a neighbor up the road who needed some pretty serious work done in his home and offered to pay my dad a bit over $3,000 for the labor. To be frank, $3,000 was a bit on the low end for the work. But my dad figured, hey, help a neighbor out, and he really needed to make some extra cash. The holidays were coming up. A little over 2 months before Christmas. The guy buys the supplies. My dad does the labor, with promises that he'll be paid when it is finished. You already know where this is going. Surprise, surprise. The work gets finished. The guy doesn't pay up. Not only does this guy not pay my dad, but he has the gall to laugh at my dad and ask him what he's going to do about it since the work was under the table. Neighbor be damned. Oh, was he, my dad, ever pissed? I remember when he flat out told me that son of a itch might not ever pay me. But he's going to be paying someone that $3,000. Just you watch, sweets. And he got to work. He couldn't spend a lot of time on his feet, but he had quite a few hours to kill. And he started planning this dude's comeuppance. He went to the store and bought a itload of jacks, the kind that come in the game of jacks, with the rubber ball and whatnot. He then proceeded to spend the next couple of weeks sharpening them up and making the ends into little spikes. Every time he would drive by this guy's house, he'd casually toss a handful out the window into this guy's driveway. You can imagine, this guy was constantly getting flat tires and had to continuously repair and replace them. Fast forward to Christmas Day. My dad calls me up cackling hysterically, so I ask him what's up. This is actually one of my favorite memories of him. He tells me, remember that neighbor? The one that ducked me over? Well, I just drove by his house and the wife and the kids are all dressed up for church standing in the front yard by their car, and it's got a couple flats. You see, I think he wised up, because he started parking in the grass, but Mother Ducker didn't know I threw them in the yard too. I love my dad. Ruin my marriage? I will take you both down. Background. In 2006 I was 25 and married a woman 13 years older than me and became a stepdad to a 15-year-old girl. I always considered myself a level-headed person. Kept my cool and went with the flow. That was until my marriage fell apart. Cast: me, Alma, former wife; Marina, stepdaughter; Carl, stepdaughter's biological father; Karen, BF's ex-wife. So it's the summer of 2009. Alma and I have 3 years in, and Marina just graduated high school. Alma tells me that Martina has been asking about her biological father. Alma says that she wants to write to an old address she had for him and see if he would be interested in getting to know his daughter. I was fine with it, as I believe that Marina had every right to try and get to know her father. A month goes by and Alma tells me that Carl emailed her and is open to getting to know his daughter. Alma and Carl email back and forth so she can feel him out and he can get a sense on what Marina is like. At this point I don't mind at all because Alma is open about all the emailing and what they write about. Fast forward a few weeks. Marina and Carl are communicating back and forth regularly. Everything looks to be working out. I start to notice Alma on the computer more and more, chatting with Carl. I ask her about it and she affirms that she and he developed a friendship over the past few weeks. I don't think much about it as she isn't hiding anything and Carl lives in Mexico City. We lived in Central CA. A few months go by and Alma tells me that Marina wants to meet Carl and he has time off coming, so it's a perfect time to do it. Alma will go with Marina, but I wouldn't be able to go since I couldn't get the time off of work. Alma and Marina go on their trip. They are gone for 2 weeks. Week 1 is spent at Alma's grandparents' home and week 2 would be spent in Cabo, where Carl would fly in to give him and Marina time to connect in person. Their vacation came and went and they finally came home. When I picked up the girls I began asking about the trip, but all I would get would be one-word answers from both of them. Marina and Alma looked like they were upset with one another. I figured they got into an argument on the way home. A few hours in a plane can do that to you. A week later and we are back in our routine, but Alma and Marina are still barely talking. I ask what is wrong and she tells me that her and Marina had an argument about Carl. I chalked it up to the meeting not being longer, so I say, well, maybe next vacation Carl has can be spent in California and he can bring his sons so Marina can meet her brothers. They can even stay with us a few days. Alma really liked that idea. Sue and I kid you not. The very next day both are at work and I have the day off. I am working around the house and come across a small stack of papers on the entryway table. I pick them up and see if they are important. It's a printed out email and I see my name in it. I read it and just keep reading through the stack of papers. It was a complete print out of Alma and Carl's email conversations they were having through her work email address. I felt sick, the more I read the sticker I felt. In the emails they had the whole vacation planned out, including the fact that Carl would be staying with her and Marina in the suite I had arranged for them rather than get his own hotel room. The worst was the fact that they were debating how they should tell Marina that they planned on being affectionate with each other during this trip because, as he put it, she should be happy that her parents are finding each other again after 18 years, and how else are you and I going to be able to share a room? Turns out Marina wasn't very happy about the situation and wouldn't let them be alone together. First thing I did was take the emails and have copies made. I wasn't sure on what I was going to do yet, but I knew I should make them. I then drove to Alma's work and tell her I was there to take her to lunch. When we got to a secluded parking lot I confronted her about the emails. She had the nerve to try and turn it on me. How could you go through my private emails like that? She didn't argue, she just claimed that the bond that she and Carl had was strong and that I wasn't the husband that she had hoped I would be. I argued, I cried, and I asked her if we could work through it, and all she would say is maybe and that she would think about it. For the next few days I was a mess. I would mope and pout when I was alone and would be Alma's attentive husband when she was home. Then I saw that she and Carl were chatting on the home computer, not even trying to hide it. The revenge. When I realized that this wasn't going to end, I decided that I needed ammunition. I already had the emails from her work, but I wanted more, so I found a computer program that runs in the background. It takes screenshots and is a keystroke logger. I installed it on both our home computers. With the program I had screenshots of their chatting sessions and I had access to Alma's personnel email accounts. I found every last bit of correspondence and printed it out. At first I thought I would take the emails to a lawyer that could use it for my divorce, but then I found out that California was a no-fault state, so it wouldn't matter. So I came up with Plan B. I took everything I had collected and began going through it. I arranged it in chronological order and began writing down every bit of information that it thought I could use. Every break at work I would just read, highlight and write down information. I ended up with 2 notebooks full of random info. Where Carl worked, where his father's home was, phrases Carl would use. Phase 2 was the fun part. I went to a popular search engine that also would provide you with a free email address. I found the link to the Mexican version and created an email address for a fake woman. Let's call her Miss Sandoval. Miss Sandoval emails Alma and tells her that she was Carl's live-in girlfriend until a few weeks prior and that she had been debating whether or not to email and warn her about Carl and his anger. Miss Sandoval wrote about their relationship and things that they would do. Like his favorite vacation spots. How she cared for his boys. All the pet names he would call her. Everything written would come from one of the emails or chats they would have. Then Miss Sandoval wrote about how he would become verbally abusive and how it started around the same time that Alma and Carl's relationship changed. Emails went back and forth for a week, and in one email I included pictures of a battered woman I found online. As this interaction is going on, I am still keeping tabs on their conversations and their tones have changed. Alma asks about Miss Sandoval and of course he denies knowing who she is, and of course Alma doesn't believe him. She is furious that he would lie to her and that now she feels like she is the reason for this poor woman's abuse. In the end Alma breaks things off with him and she even shares the email from Miss Sandoval with Marina and convinces her that her father is a terrible person and she shouldn't have any more contact with him. Oh, but that's not all. During my spying I was able to find Carl's ex-wife's, Karen, social media and had Miss Sandoval email her a copy of every email I had. Now, I don't know what Mexico's divorce laws are like, but Karen was very grateful for all the info and was sure that it would help her in the divorce that had been going on for 3 years at that point. Now let's not forget about Alma. She didn't go unscathed from this. When her relationship with Carl tanked, she naturally tried to fix things with me. And me, so satisfied that I torpedoed their relationship, was more than happy to accept her attention. Don't get me wrong, our marriage was over. I was just leading her to think that we were working things out. On the day that I left, the first eviction notice arrived from the bank. Apparently the ordeal made me forget to pay the mortgage on our house. and her job received an email from me with copies of her and Carl's inappropriate emails made using the company email address and showing it was on company time. It was worth the hit to my credit score just to get her frantic voice messages about her losing the house and her getting demoted at work. Edit, update. So, to answer some of the common questions I've gotten, Marina and I still talk and visit on occasion, but she has her own family and I moved away due to work. Marina and her biological father tried to connect again a few years later, but in the end he cut all ties with her because she wouldn't act like a loving and devoted daughter on the first visit. Alma and Marina never found out that I was the one to email her as Miss Sandoval. I need to clarify that I intentionally forgot to pay the home mortgage for a few months. She had no idea since I was the one who set up the online accounts and I picked up all the mail. Landlord tries to evict us in the middle of winter. Ends up costing her more money. About 5 months after leaving, my wife and my best friend had a falling out with his girlfriend. We ended up moving in together in a 1-bedroom basement apartment near downtown. Here is the cast for the story: my best friend, Joe. The landlord, Carol, because she reminds me of my evil stepmother. The fire marshal, Bill. Health inspector, Jenny. Our lawyer, Jim, and the building inspector, Charles. We ended up moving in during the spring of 2007. It was a small apartment and the utilities were included in the rent. We were paying $600 a month. I took the bedroom while Joe slept in the small living room, kitchenette on the couch. There were some problems with a couple of items, but it wasn't anything I couldn't fix. Carol didn't mind me putting down new cement for the basement steps or fixing the awning outside of our door so it wouldn't leak. Things were looking good until the fall and winter hit. Every time it rained, the water would come down and flood the basement. I had to invest in a shop vac to suck up the water. When it got cold, the heating ducts were virtually useless, so we had to run the stove to keep warm. This worked out okay until February the next year when Carol got her electric bill. I worked nights and was sleeping when she came down and told Joe that we had to leave because her electric was so high. He tried to explain to her that the heat down here didn't work and we were freezing. She didn't care. Joe wakes me up and tells me this. I was not having it. Joe and I went down to City Hall and went to the Board of Health office. That is where we met Jenny. We explained our situation to her and she set up a time to investigate it with Bill and Charles. About 3 days later, Jenny, Bill and Charles show up at Carol's door and demand to investigate the basement. Carol is pissed. As they all come into our apartment, they start listing all the violations such as inadequate heat, unpadded carpet flooring, no second egress exit, no access to fuse panels or circuit breakers. Carol start arguing with Joe about this. She didn't want to talk to me because I was white and Joe was black as she was. But Joe is Blackfoot. She is Haitian. Even still, Joe didn't like her. Carol, why did you call them? Joe, I didn't. Carol, who did? Me, I did. Carol, you had no right to do this. We don't have a lease. Me, oh no? What do you call this then? I pull out the agreement we all signed and showed her that electric was included in the rent. Jenny and Charles looked at it as well and said this does constitute a tenancy at will agreement. She was ordered by the city to repair and bring the basement up to code as long as we were living there. About 2 weeks later, HVAC contractors showed up to start working on putting a separate heating system in for the basement. Also, a county sheriff showed up about another 4 weeks after with letters of eviction for both Joe and I. In Massachusetts, eviction cases go through civil court, but the tenant's lawyer can have the case moved to housing court. Housing court leans more towards the tenant than the landlord. We speak to our lawyer Jim, who believes we can get our security deposit back but not much else. Joe is looking to move in with his new girlfriend, and I'm planning on taking her old place, which is only around the block from where we live now. In the meantime, while we are still there at her house, she still has to get it up to code and we don't have to pay her. We show up to housing court when Jim tells us our hearing is. Carol does show up with her lawyer. We wait quietly on the other side of the hall while Jim goes to speak to Carol and her attorney. Jim gives her the proposal for her to pay our security deposit back and Jim's fee. She refuses the offer and Jim tells her that we will go to trial then. He comes back and tells Joe and I this and says he will call us when we have to appear. We agree and we all leave. As we are leaving, I see Carol having an argument with the meter maid who is writing her a ticket for not putting money in the meter. Joe and I are laughing so hard as we drive by her. After Joe and I moved out, she settled for the deposit and lawyer's fees. I ended up getting $600 back, but after we left, the inspectors all came back and told her she couldn't rent out the basement anymore. With everything totaled up, she ended spending over $7,000 in upgrades. Another $1,100 in both mine and her attorney fees plus my $600. She ended up putting the house on the market. No one would buy it. I think to this day it is still up for sale. Any takers? Ha 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 ha. Steal my petrol? Pay thousands of euros. So, English is not my first language. Also TLDR at the bottom. Background, so I have an asshole neighbor and his insane family who we always had problems with. When I am done I will add some other shenanigans. This included flinging trash onto our side, putting his dog on our side so it would poop there, and at one point, stealing our petrol from our outdoor tank. Now, on with the story. The problem. So about 2 years ago, in April to May, we noticed that the petrol in the tank was going down very quickly even though the amount we used was very little. After a bit of investigating we found a pipe that had been installed that led to his side of the land. Recently he got this huge new car that obviously needed a bunch of gas. And it seemed that along with some being used overtime, there were huge amounts used every week, so he was presumably filling his car. To stop him, my dad hatched a plan. Keep in mind we could not call the cops on him as they would do nothing because his nephew was a policeman and we live in Greece, so you know, family ties and stuff. Planning. Since this was during the summer we waited until he went on holiday, he was quite rich, and then disconnected our house from the pipes. So there would be no chance of him suspecting everything. We kept the charade up until he came back and went back to using our petrol. We noticed a pattern to when he used our petrol to fill his car, I think every 4 to 5 days, and we used this to our advantage. The revenge. The day before he filled it up, we topped it up with soap water and mixed it around in order to make it petrol color, with any petrol left over, and we removed just enough for it to have the same color. For those of you who do not know, water in the gas tank is a no-no and it causes a lot of damage that is very expensive. So this completely destroyed his gas tank and the damage was so great. It was cheaper to sell his car. At that time it was summer, and so we do not need gas to heat up water, due to the water in his heating system, as it was plugged into our tank filled with the petrol water mixture. The metal started eroding, and rusting, or something, and water made it through the pipes, and so it was in contact with the concrete which made it moldy and weak. A few months later it made it through the concrete and a piece of the ceiling collapsed and all the petrol water flooding in. It obviously cost him a lot of money to fix it, as well as the money lost with the car and the heating system. I can only assume it was in the thousands. TLDR. A whole neighbor uses out petrol. We fill it with soap water which destroys his car, heating system and house. Anyway, that was my revenge story. Thanks for reading. Other shenanigans. He put his dog on our side. It shat everywhere, so we gathered it, the poop, in a plastic bag. Hid it on his property and lit it on fire. He had a few chickens and we stole the eggs. And that's it. Edit. I gathered the poop in a bag, not the dog. LMAO. Shop colluded with vending machine to charge expensive prices. In our campus there is a tuck shop which sells snacks for higher than usual prices. The owner has a contract with the institution so they don't have any competition. Everyone knows they're expensive, including the higher-up people, but the higher-ups are not the ones with caffeine and sugar cravings. After some lobbying, the institution tried to introduce competition by installing vending machines from another company in another part of the campus. But that building required an access key to enter, meaning visitors couldn't use it. But most people had access, so it wasn't a problem. The problem came when the vending machine owner decided to charge the exact same prices as the tuck shop. Here's the revenge part. A cohort lived near the vending machines and was able to monitor the arrival times of the refill guy. Whenever he left we would put up a sign on the machine saying, "Machine eats your coins," and removed the sign before he arrived each time. As a result, the company's sales were low. After a while we arranged someone to walk by when they were checking the machine and told him that the tuck shop owner made an emotional plea that the vending machine was stealing her business and that she needed our support to survive. That's why no one would buy from the vending machine, especially when it charges the exact same prices. Not long after, the vending machine's prices dropped below the tuck shop prices. Now was time to do the reverse. We first made the vending machine more accessible to everyone by pushing it closer to the main entrance, and put a bunch of rubbish bins in its old place so that the vendor couldn't move it back, and wedged open the door so that it was accessible by everyone and anyone who forgot to bring their access card. Now there's no way of knowing whether this would hurt the tuck shop sales. But we were hoping it would, and only time will tell if the tuck shop drops their prices. Never piss off an imaginative man. This wasn't my act of revenge. I just happened to see some of the fallout. I was however really impressed. My cousin was getting married, and not having ever been to a wedding at her denomination, I went to the wedding rehearsal to make sure that I knew what to expect. I arrived in the church's car park, quite a large lot, to see a man shouting at a police officer who was telling him that the police could not and would not get involved and he could always seek a civil remedy. Having parked, and being quite nosy, I take a closer look. A white van, a transit, I recall, had been parked in the middle of the car park. Over several spaces, and from the lettering it belonged to a small builder. Now this car park is clearly marked up as being private property and for church users only. Parked closely around the van, so they blocked it in completely, were around 10 other cars. It was going nowhere. Being early, I entered the church and was greeted by the minister. We got to chatting, as you do, and I asked him about the van. He told me that it belonged to a local builder who, over the course of several months, had acted as if the car park was his private property and would always park inconveniently for other users, and had been known to just dump building rubble along the back fence, leaving it for the church to clear away. Apparently, the minister had spoken to him and asked him to be respectful of his congregation, and had been rudely asked, "What the F are you going to do about it?" Now this church had a very good choir who every year went on a 2-week tour, and this year they were going to Germany to sing in other churches of their denomination. The minister had arranged for a minibus to pick the choir up from the church early that morning to take the singers to the airport. When the choir members arrived, he had asked them to park all around the van, and then cheerfully told the builder that they would be back in 2 weeks. As it was on private property, the police just wouldn't get involved. TLDR: man parks inconsiderately on private property. Finds he's stuck for 2 weeks. Revenge is sweet like honey. This is not my story, but I still laugh every time my friend tells it to someone else. My friend's father is a beekeeper and has his bees in the field near our hometown. There are a few unruly kids in the neighborhood, and one day they decided it would be fun to walk past the hives and knock them all over. Obviously, this would cause damage to the hives and disturb the bees. We had a pretty good idea who the culprits might be, but obviously nothing in our hands to accuse them. The bees were friendly and probably just got confused, but had not stung anyone. However, if you know anything about bees, not all are that friendly. For starters, some tend to get more and more aggressive when they stay in the same hive for several years. But there are also breeds that are less willing to accept disturbances in general. My friend's father bought a new swarm of bees from a different country, the kind you do not mess with because they are seriously aggressive. In fact, he would get the honey out of all the other hives when it was time to harvest, but left the last hive in the row untouched. Even he did not want to mess with those bees. The honey was not worth it, and the hive was not put there to produce any. They were purely put there for revenge. As predicted, the neighborhood boys eventually returned. It was a warm summer day when my friend's stepfather discovered that the hives had been knocked over yet again, and the bees were upset, including that last hive in the row. My friend's stepfather calmly put them back up and tended to the damage. Then grabbed his car for a calm drive around town. When he passed the house of those unruly kids, they were in the garden, covered in bee stings and looking absolutely miserable. Each of them had angry red bumps all over their faces and arms, smeared with white ointment. According to my friend's father, those angry bees had barely left a patch of exposed skin untouched. It's a small town, and they of course knew whose hives they had knocked over. My friend's stepfather honked, waved at them with a smile, and drove on to do his shopping. The boys looked at him with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. But what could they do? My friend's father was free to keep any breed of bees he wanted, and they had trespassed and damaged his property, and paid the price for it. Needless to say, no one touched those bee hives ever again. So executive jobs are more important than mine, even if I'm the one who makes this thing go? Then pay me for staying in home. Edit, fix a little the text to the amount of people saying my English is bad. Ja. Hope this time is a little bit better. My dad work in company doing some engineering work. I'm not going to specify what for obvious reasons. The thing is that he arrives there several years ago, and since he is very good at his work, rapidly knew how everything works there. Where is everything, what you should do, etc. In the recent years, this industry here has been in a steep decline, so a lot of firing has going on in the last 3 to 4 years. Until the closing is inevitable. But as some of you know, environmental regulation on closing industry can last for even years, applying impact mitigation. So my dad stood there more time than he thought, because information is power. During the closing process, a lot of inefficient managers and executives has passed by the company because no one knows anything. Except my dad. But as you may know, is more important to save money keeping this people rather than really useful people. So my dad go fired. He took this in a very smart way. Saves a lot of money since he owns the house and has no debt, and see this situation coming years ago. Over the course of the week after being fired, he kept receiving calls of managers to ask him work stuff they should know. Until my dad tell them to stop it. Because he doesn't work anymore there and has no access to the critical data in his work account, only accessible by the company laptop which they gift him. And if they wanted him to give them the raw data, he will do it. But he will not help at all since he is not getting paid. In less than a day they call him to go on a meeting in the HQ to reincorporate him. And he says no, but they insisted, to the point he went anyway to the meeting, letting they know in advance he will not come back. The meeting came and they offered him the same job, same payment, etc., and he declines. So to convince him, the company said to him to make an offer to the HR department. By this point my mom tell my dad to go nuts on the offer. To make a duck you to the company. Obviously the HR representative made a counter offer less good than the initial one, his former work back to shine for saving money as a great negotiator. Also he is one the guys who agreed my dad was too expensive. So he was unnecessary. To what my dad says no, and goodbye. 1 week after that, HQ and a big committee calls him for asking him why he is not working by now because everything is upside down in the work. So my dad tells them that the HR representative and the managers doesn't accept his offer. After hear that they practically beg him to come back accepting his offer. In response my dad founded his own consulting company. So now they have to negotiate with him in other terms, as an external consultant, and the cost for the work now is higher due as a company. Not a single person. So magic happens, my dad has a job with better payment, and almost not field work, just swearing calls and giving advices to clueless people in how to do stuff. Making some maps, and some meetings once in a month, which since he is the only one who knows almost everything is more like a class than a meeting. PD, first gold ever. Thank you kind Stanger. You destroy my own entrance? Get ready to get disowned. So I posted this story about my mom around 3 weeks ago. When she drove all the way to EAC to get me to her birthday, posted the story on Entitled Parents. On the 7th she was at my door alone, without my brother or my big sister. I refused to come to her home and she just left. Longer story, but I don't wanna make this too long. Early in the morning on the 8th she broke into my freaking home to get me, and after I kicked her out she broke my front window out of anger. That was it for me. I had decided to file a restraining order against my own mother. I needed evidence of her abusing me and her breaking my property. When I went to the police I gave them 4 things. 1. All the messages of her expecting me to come to her birthday rather than going to surgery. 2. 3 old videos made by my sister in 2014 of her beating me because I didn't have straight A's. I was over 18 and now I'm 23. And 3. My neighbor had footage of a bit of my front house and I had footage of her throwing the stone towards the window, but no footage of the window being hit. Edit. 4. Also she left my brother alone without telling my sister or anyone. After 2 stressful weeks of it and surgery, I won. I have a restraining order on my mother and I managed to convince my grandma to disown her. After grandma disowned her, most of my extended family did too. Within 3 weeks my mother lost all contact to me and the extended family. She got disowned and is now being investigated by the police. My brother is staying at my sister, 30-year-old, and she lives only a couple of streets away from mom, and even he doesn't want to see my mom. Litterbug Busted. Not sure if this is totally ProRevenge, but it is definitely more professional than my first few ideas of handling it. So my last job I worked at a construction company that had a fairly large yard, land as well as a warehouse. In the yard were many old storage trailers, probably around 30 to 40. Just old semi-trailers that were old and not really roadworthy anymore, so were used to store customers' building materials, machinery to be delivered on the job. So there is a fairly long dirt road out to the very back portion of the yard that isn't visible from the shop or warehouse. We mostly just keep our oldest and worst trailers out there before we get around bringing them to the junkyard. But some of them are still used by customers and have equipment in them. One day in mid-March I was instructed to head back there to check in a trailer for one of our customers. Now this was after a really snowy winter, so there was still a lot of dirty piles of snow everywhere and things like that. And more or less we had no reason to go back there during the winter as snow removal was so hard to stay on top of anyway. I hadn't been back there in a few months. So when I get back there I'm pretty pissed when I see about 10 large black household trash bags in a big pile thrown underneath one of the trailers. This is a lot of ducking trash, like a month's worth for a family of 5 or so. At this point raccoons or some other wildlife had gotten to them, so they were pretty ripped apart and thrown about as well. Ah piss, what an asshole. I'm pretty heated and I go back to the warehouse to get some stuff to clean it up, gloves, a shovel and a big bin to scoop it in so I can grab it with the forklift. About a minute into scooping it up I'm pissed because it's under a trailer, so I have to bend down and basically crouch, and it's extra difficult, awkward to shovel. A light goes on and I'm thinking, any asshole this dumb with this much trash certainly has thrown away some mail in this time period. Within 30 seconds I find 3 pieces of mail with his name and address on it. I call the non-emergency police line and tell them someone has been dumping trash. Within a minute a cop shows up and we have a chat if I can approach this short of driving to the dude's address and spreading it all over his lawn. What my petty revenge idea was, haha, so the cop is the man and actually goes to the address. Finds out the guy moved. Went to the post office, finds his new address and confronts him about it. Of course the guy denies it, with some story about how it must have been his landlord after he moved out, and the cop basically asked him if he'd rather just clean it up or try to tell that story to a judge. So now that I knew he was going to be back to clean it up, I threw all the trash back under the trailer and ripped the bags up a little more so it was a bit more gross and unmanageable. The absolute best part was that the time he went back in the evening was torrentially downpouring with thunder lightning. Absolutely raining buckets, ha ha ha, so he got to clean up his mess while me and 2 other officers watched him inside our nice warm dry vehicles while he got dumped on in very cold very heavy rain, haha, karma itch. Roommate lacks the will to get up on his own. I see a lot of hot-blooded revenge stories lately where huge storms get stirred up and someone gets fired or arrested. My story is cold-blooded revenge, where a very small and deliberate action makes my victim lose out. My first semester at college I had a roommate who was a pain in the butt. He made up honor code rules to tell us we weren't allowed to watch movies or listen to music he didn't like. Didn't realize food wasn't his. Stayed up past curfew with friends over being loud. Didn't help clean the dorm for inspections. And had a consistent holier-than-thou attitude because of his religion. I'm pretty calm, and I rarely ever get even. But after a semester of his nonsense I had no issues with revenge. He was going to study music, but failed the entrance audition to an important class and needed to take another 2 credits in order to keep his scholarship. So he joined the social dance class one was taking at 7:45 a.m. every other day. A couple weeks in, he decides to set his alarm to 6:15 a.m. 15 minutes before I get up. My morning habit is very tight: wake at 6:30, shower, change, eat, and walk to class, arriving with 5 minutes to spare. His morning habit is, allow the alarm to play for 5 to 10 minutes before turning it off. Go back to sleep until I finish showering and come back into the room. Then get up, shower, and leave just a few minutes after me, arriving right as class starts. I deal with it for a while, and he even acknowledges that it's probably annoying and I should turn it off since I don't get up anyway. He doesn't. I figured I could use his habit against him. He was essentially Pavlov trained to wake up when I came back into the room. So in the last 2 weeks of the semester, I changed my routine slightly. I would eat before showering. That made it so I came back into the room just a few minutes before leaving and with just enough time to walk to class. He, not realizing it was so late, took his shower and arrived at class with only a few minutes left. Getting an absent for the day. The dance department has a very strict rule that 4 unexcused absences is an automatic fail. Roommate doesn't remember this rule. He continues to rely on me coming into the room to wake him up. He continues being absent for the last 4 days of class. His first semester report card gets an F, which brings his GPA too low to get his scholarship the next year. Hope you enjoyed it. I know I did. Sell beer to my kid, will ya? So we all know that sometimes revenge is dish best served cold, and this story is an old family legend. My grandmother was a pro at the long game, and this one was one of her best acts. Back in the 70s there was a little pizza shop around the corner from their house that she discovered was selling beer to my 15-year-old uncle. She marched right into the store during the busiest time on a Saturday night and yelled at the owner that it needed to stop now. The idiot waved her off and said it was his business and he could do whatever he wanted. He practically shoved her out the front door and told her not to come back. My grandmother told him if he ever sold beer to my uncle again it would be the end of his days in that neighborhood. Remember, this was the 70s. The police weren't really enforcing liquor laws as stringently as they are now. Especially when it came to corner pizza shops and one woman allegations that their 15-year-old son was getting beer illegally. Fast forward about 1 month and what does my grandmother find under my uncle's bed? Beer, and she knows where he got it. She confronts him and just like before, he says the pizza guy has been selling it to him and all the neighborhood kids. My grandmother asks some other mothers if they have found their kids with beer and sure enough. Yep, it's a thing. Now you might be thinking so what? A couple of teenagers with beer. Big deal, we all did that. Except this guy was making a killing selling beer to the neighborhood kids. According to my uncle, he was selling to kids as young as 8, this he confirmed for me when he was an adult, and even sold it to them out the back door after hours, which is really illegal since it breaks major liquor laws to do that. My grandfather then went to the cops and they played the "we'll take a report and look into it" type of stance with him. Not to fear. My grandmother was going to make good on her threat. I should probably mention that this whole thing went down in August. My grandmother threatened my uncle with life imprisonment if he ever bought beer there again and to completely stay out of that shop because bad things were going to happen. August comes and goes and so does September, October, November and the entire winter and spring. Like I said, my grandmother liked to play the long game. So July rolls around and completely out of the blue, a municipal snow plow rolls down the street at midnight and right into the front of this guy's shop. Backing up and smashing into it again and once more for good measure. It then pulls back and rolls down the street like nothing happened. Never to be seen again. The whole thing was witnessed by a couple of neighbors sitting on their front steps trying to beat the heat that night. They called the cops and no one could believe what they were looking at and that there was a snowplow out in July. Clearly someone was mistaken. The mothers of the neighborhood knew there was no mistake. They knew what went down and it was a silent secret among them. No one spoke of it. No one acknowledged it. And no one cared. My family knew the real story. My grandmother knew someone who needed money so she paid him to help. The guy had a buddy who had access to the snow plows for the county. The rest was history. Even with all money the pizza shop guy made selling beer to minors. He didn't have adequate business insurance to rebuild. Within days, he was closed for good. TLDR, guy sold beer to my underage uncle so my grandmother sent a snowplow through his store in the middle of summer and closed his business for good. My revenge on my boss for trying to take my pay. This is a long one from a few years back when I was a teen working at a generic fast food restaurant while in school. I was 16 at the time and had been working at this store for a year or so. We had this supervisor who was just horrible to work for. He would leave us while we were packed with customers and sit on his phone talking the whole shift. Only come out to bark orders and abuse us for not working hard enough. Eat the food we were cooking, and when customers complained he would belittle us in front of them, blaming our attitudes. Now everyone hated this guy. Even the other supervisors hated him. He was lazy, and to be completely honest I think he only had the job because his uncle owned the store. He would come in to start his shift, plant his ass in the office and wouldn't come out unless it was to tell you how it you are and how he isn't afraid to replace you. We were all teens working that needed the money for our families and he knew this and would hold our jobs over our head. The store was in a bad area. We were all either supporting our families or trying to stay out of gangs and whatnot. The store is open until late so we can get good hours in after school. Well, this one particular night we were very short-handed. It was me, my workmate Joe and supervisor. Me and Joe assumed he would back us up and serve customers while I cooked and Joe made all the burgers and wraps. But no, he came in, planted his ass in the office and told me to cook as well as do burgers and wraps and Joe will serve. I protested and said it was too much for me to cover. He completely ignores me and acts as if he didn't hear a word I said. So I protest a little louder and no joke he turns to me and says, "Well, if you don't like it, you can kiss this job goodbye." I bit my tongue and returned to my duties pissed off. Joe was pissed off too. He knew that if supervisor ran things this way, he would receive all the abuse as he was the person out front serving. Like I said, we were in a bad area. Customers often came in drunk and irritable. There's often fights and we get a lot of homeless people loitering and junkies. He knew he was going to get abused by someone tonight who would possibly throw something at him. Fast forward a few hours into our shift and we are in the middle of our dinner rush. There's a itload of orders to be made and not enough meat cooked to make it all. Customers are complaining about waiting times. I can hear Joe out the front getting absolutely destroyed by the growing mob of angry customers whom he is doing his best to keep calm. Supervisor for the first time the entire shift comes out to see what's happening. He sees the mob of angry customers who are starting to shout in anger, hurling insults and all. He goes out to confront them and calls me to the front. As soon as I'm inside of the mob and supervisor, he starts to berate me, throwing 1,000 questions at me at once. Why isn't this done? Why isn't that done? Abused me further. Then calls Joe over, abuses us both and tells the customers he's sorry we are so incompetent and pulls us both out back. If you two don't lift your game, you won't be working here any longer, and just because you fell so far behind, I'm taking tonight's pay from you. At this point I wanted to kill him. We were working our asses off while short-handed and he didn't lift a finger to help us. I wouldn't let this slide. It lit a fire in me and I was going to make sure I got paid for tonight no matter what. So I plotted. I concocted a most evil plan in my pot of payback potions and would soon conjure it into existence. I even asked Joe for help with it and he agreed willingly once I told him the plan. This plan would make us legends of our store. Executing the plan. After the rush was over and we were about to close shop, I went on my break. Remember how I said we had a lot of homeless people loitering? Well, I'm thankful we did. While I was on my break, I convinced a homeless man to come and take a dump in the urinal in our bathroom and I would get him some free food. He laughed at me at first and asked if I was serious. It took a little convincing as he couldn't believe someone was asking him to do something he usually does without being asked or offered food for. He agrees after a bit, but I told him I would have to sneak him in with the help of Joe. I bring him to the slide doors and signal Joe to distract supervisor long enough for him to turn his head from the computer screen and cameras. We slip in and make it to the bathroom. When we get there I tell him to go in and do the deed while I go make his food. He giggles and agrees and heads in. I headed to the kitchen where Joe is and tell him the job is underway and I'll need a distraction to get him out once he's done. Joe tells me he will go to tell supervisor he is leaving. It will give me a moment to get him back out quick. I make the guy's food and head back to the bathroom entrance, but he is still not out. I was waiting a good 10 minutes. He had been in there over 20 minutes. When he exited I catch a whiff of a most foul odor seeping from the bathroom. What the hell, dude? What did you do in there? He tells me he may have missed a bit but job's done more or less. I give his food to him and signal Joe to distract again. Once he does I sneak old guy out of the store and thank him for his help, to which he replies, I've been asked some weird it. But you kid are messed up. I wasn't about to let him steal my pay from me, I was going to make him pay for it. I head back to the bathroom to check, and I tell you I couldn't have asked the guy to do a better job. I was aiming for a stool in a puddle, but this was something else. It had overflown out of the urinal, down the wall and on the floor. It was everywhere. Joe swings by on his way out and couldn't believe what he was seeing. I shook his hand and said to him, it was a pleasure to work with you and good luck. He leaves and I go to confront supervisor. Once I reached the office I let everything go on him. I swore at him, told him I quit. Joe's gone home. I'm leaving. Nothing has been cleaned for close and someone took it in the urinal again. He begged me not to leave while I laughed at him maniacally. Told him to piss off. You want to take my pay? Take the job too. Have fun scraping poop off the wall. I threw my shirt at him, walked out and never went back. I heard from Joe that supervisor was there all night cleaning everything and was forced to clean the bathroom. Everyone except supervisor knows what I did and cheered for me for doing it. I went down in store history for the next year, because it closed after that and was replaced by another generic fast food store. Doctor, I convinced a homeless man to it in a urinal at a restaurant I worked at and quit. Left it for my boss to clean because he threatened to take my pay away and was an absolute knob. You should read the story. It's worth it. Getting a protected species off the list. If you've ever worked in a cafe you'll know who the protected species are. They're usually blonde, female, and hot. They get the cruisy jobs like barista or waitress. They get paid to bat their eyelashes and look pretty and not much else. For some reason they never have to help the other staff clean and pack down the establishment at the end of a shift. They never, and I mean never, have to clean the toilets. In fact, you never really see them do anything except text on their phone and be rude to customers. Usually the boss wants to duck them so they get away with not working. I got so sick of the protected species at one of my jobs because she'd leave earlier than me every day and leave all the cleaning and packing down for me to do, even though we were meant to share the job equally. I mentioned it to the boss. He pretended to take it on board and nothing was ever said or done about it. She continued to show up, not work, collect money, then hit the beach. If only we all could be kissed on the ass by financially stable neo-hippie parents and surf through life on a sea of coconut oil and kale smoothies. The final straw came when she made me empty her coffee bin after standing there texting on her phone and watching me clean the entire cafe by myself. We had 4 seating areas and an outdoor courtyard that needed attending to. That's a lot of furniture, umbrellas, heavy signs and flower pots to carry and store inside, as well as mopping, vacuuming, cleaning down all the furniture, and packing down and cleaning the front of house equipment. One day I got to work a few minutes before her and I punched holes in the bottom of a fresh bin bag and set up her coffee bin for the day. Usually I work very clean and efficiently. I put everything away after using it, refill items that are running low, and wipe down my workspaces. This day I did the kinds of things she would do. I left everything out and messy. I let everything including the floor get sticky when I made the fresh squeezed juices. I deliberately left spilled milk around the milkshake mixers. I didn't refill the cakes in the display fridge. I made sure I got coffee grind under my shoes and tracked it all over the sticky tiles. I didn't cut up fruit to refill the tubs. I didn't refill anything. Then 45 minutes before the cafe was due to close I quietly slipped into the little office out the back and told my boss I was having lady problems and needed to leave early. I rarely took sick days and I always came in early and worked back late. He didn't question it and told me to go home and take care of myself. I slipped out the back without saying goodbye. When I got to work the next day I found out she had pulled the bag out of the coffee bin and all the filthy grind and watery black slop went all over her shoes and the tiles she had just mopped. She had to stay back and clean it up and mop the floor a second time. She had to clean and pack down the entire cafe by herself and it was 10 times filthier than it usually was because I hadn't been giving a duck all day. It took her almost 2 hours to do it all and by the end she was covered in filth, sweating, and cursing about it. Little Precious couldn't handle putting in any elbow grease and she was it at her job. This became obvious to my boss finally. He was not impressed that it took her so long to pack down. She tried to complain about me leaving early and leaving it all for her and he pointed out that she often does the same thing to me only it doesn't take me anywhere near as long to do my job. Any time she worked with me after that, the boss made sure she did half the work. She hated it and she hated me. It was obvious. I tried not to look too smug about it. She didn't last there too much longer. My car is unsafe to drive, and you can't release it to me. Enjoy your arrest. Not my story but one I read, and too good not to share. Name taken off to protect privacy as per Reddit policy. So yes, as you all see, I'm a chick nursing student. I'm also 30, a military vet, Army, and have always done approximately 90% of the work on my vehicles. The only things I can't do are balance tires, I don't have the tools, and some of the large work that requires things like cherry pickers and whatnot, again, I don't have the tools. So, like any good vehicle owner whose vehicle has sat for a long period of time without being driven, after getting back from a 6-month mobilization that left my little Toyota State Route 5 truck sitting in dry storage, I went through and did maintenance, checked and replaced my fan belts, air filters, spark plugs, oil and fuel filters, did an oil change and radiator flush, checked the battery and connections, checked my brake pads and alignment, swapped out my winter tires for summer tires, cleaned out my truck and replaced my winter survival gear with summer survival gear because yes, that is a priority where I live, etc. Last but not least, I added injector treatment to my fuel tank, filled my tank, and took my truck to have the tires balanced by a Les Schwab tire place. Now, because of other errands I had and because I had just spent 6 months in unpleasant sandy areas in uniform, I dressed up, heels, dress slacks, silk blouse, well-tailored jacket, hair up in a bun, dressed like that. I dropped my truck off, agreed that I needed the tires balanced and that was it, and was told that it would be about an hour. Awesome. I was about to walk off to go to my other errands down the block when I noticed through that big glass window the Les Schwab places have that they were already pulling my truck into the bay. So I decided to wait, and being the interested person that I am, I watched as 2 guys started to pull my tires off my truck. And a third, the man who had taken my keys and agreed that I was only asking for my tires to be balanced, sat in the driver's seat jotting down notes on a little notepad. After about 10 minutes, the third guy with the notepad came back inside and walked over to me and explained that, during his free assessment of my vehicle, he found a lot of safety issues that needed to be corrected. Like what? I asked him. Well, it's like this, he responded, and then proceeded to rattle off a list of 10 or 12 items from his notepad that he had noticed in his free assessment. Fan belt needs replaced. Overdue for oil change and radiator flush. Fuel and oil filters are shot and have to be replaced. Brake pads are shot and have to be replaced. Alignment is totally out of whack and ruined my tires, which now have to be replaced instead of just balanced. Everything on his list were things I had just checked and/or replaced. He ended with this: "I'm really sorry miss, but your vehicle is one big safety problem. I can't release it to you to drive in the condition it's currently in." Keep in mind, not only had I just done all this work, most of it on his list, but he had never once opened the hood of my truck. You can't look at the majority of what I have listed here, or that he had on his list, without opening the hood of the vehicle. After a moment of consideration, I asked him how much he thought it would be to make it roadworthy. He screwed up his face and did some math in his little notebook. A rough estimate? $3,700. But it could cost more because your vehicle is technically an import, and the parts can be hard to find. I asked to speak with the manager, and was told that the manager was out for the day. I then responded with, "So you're telling me that, unless I get $3,700 worth of work done on my vehicle, you can't release my vehicle to me, the rightful owner, because it isn't safe or roadworthy?" Yes. He continued on with this babble of apologies and explanations in a sly, fakely apologetic condescending tone, and asked if there was anyone I could consult with about a repair this large, or if there was anyone who could give me a ride home. I asked him to give me a couple of minutes, and walked out into the parking lot and got on my phone out of earshot from him or his mechanics, who were still balancing my tires, and promptly got on the phone with the sheriff's department. When I explained everything to the officer, he promised to be out in 15 minutes to help me clear the matter up. I walked back inside and told that mechanic, with the sweetest smile I could conjure, that I would have someone here presently to help me with the matter. I also asked him for the list of repairs needed along with his quote so I could discuss it with my friend, who would be arriving shortly. He happily handed me the evidence to his arrest and even signed his name on it for me, so that I could get in contact with him if I needed more than today to consider the repairs and costs. The cherry on top of the whole thing was, the absent manager walked in just in time to see the employee get handcuffed, and I got a free tire balance service because of what the now former employee tried to pull. Army revenge story. This might not be revenge as much as it's just normal military training, hazing. A little background first, this story happened to my dad while he was in the Army shortly after Vietnam ended. My dad went to OCS, Officer Candidate School, and was a captain in an artillery unit. I've heard him throw around terms like 10th Mountain Division and Rangers a ton while I was growing up, and his uniforms say stuff like that. I'm an Army brat, but I never joined since it has no appeal to me. I don't know a ton about how things work in the Army, and so I might get a few of the details wrong since I am retelling the story based off of what I remember him saying while growing up. My dad was a captain when this all happened at Fort Sill. Sorry to all you Army guys that will see something is off in my story. I don't know exactly how Army bureaucracy works. Joes would be trained by my dad's top SGT that he nicknamed Top, and they were great friends up to the day Top died in the early 2000s. My dad and Top would show these guys how to fire artillery and do the math that comes into shooting the gun and how to stack ammo for it and do charge bags, etc. One thing you'd never do is stack rounds on the deck of the howitzer. A howitzer, from what I understand, is a giant gun capable of shooting something like 30 miles away. Not stacking the rounds on the deck was beaten into everyone's heads, and there was this one guy, we'll call him Timmy, that simply didn't care and would stack it on the deck anyways. One day they were firing off the howitzer and Timmy put some giant 8-inch rounds on the deck. When this gun is fired, I guess the whole deck and everything will jump and go back like 3 feet, which can cause these rounds to flip over and possibly detonate whatever is loaded into the heads of them like explosives. Which is why you never do that. My dad sees this happen and then sees Top jump down Timmy's throat about safety, etc., and Timmy is unfazed. Later that week my dad gets a call from his superior saying they need to meet. My dad meets with his superior and he says that Timmy has lodged a complaint against my dad and Top because they constantly single me out for their problems, or something to that degree. My dad's superior says that he thinks the complaint got lost in the mail as he throws it in the trash. My dad said he got the hint that he needed to do something about Timmy since he was endangering everybody and now making written complaints that were downright lies. Instead of getting into a paper war to get Timmy discharged over safety violations, my dad decided good old-fashioned hazing would work better. Fast forward a few weeks and my dad and the Joes are in foxholes and doing some type of war game in a huge Oklahoma field on base. It's pouring rain and they are just sitting tight for a reason I can't remember. My dad calls Timmy over and says, "Timmy, you see that stop sign down the road, about 2 miles away?" Timmy says, "Yes, sir." My dad says, "Run down to it and report back if it's raining." Timmy runs down and back and says, "Sir, it's raining, sir." My dad says, "Very good. Timmy, get back to your hole." Timmy makes a face of displeasure and my dad says, "Timmy, is there a problem?" Timmy says that there isn't, but it pisses my dad off for some reason and so he decides Timmy is lonely. My dad says, "Timmy, are you lonely in your foxhole? Do you need a companion?" Timmy says, "Sir, no, sir," and my dad says, "Bullet, you look lonely." Dad then tells Timmy to find the biggest rock he can carry and report back immediately. Timmy comes back about 10 minutes later with a rock the size of a watermelon and my dad says, out ducking standing, "Timmy, you've found a friend. Go back to your hole with your new BFR, big ducking rock." Timmy goes back to his foxhole and puts the rock down at his feet in the foxhole. Top goes over to where Timmy has a foxhole and says, "Timmy, you ducking selfish asshole," or something to that degree. "You didn't dig a foxhole for your BFR. Do you want your BFR to die?" Timmy says no and then starts digging a second foxhole. Fast forward a few days and they are back in the barracks and Timmy has been dragging around his BFR for the whole time, digging foxholes for it, carrying its ammo, etc. All the Joes have to fall into a line in the morning where my dad will look them over and tell them if something looks wrong. Go over the war game results or plan another one or something to that degree. Timmy shows up late running with his BFR. Top goes over to Timmy and says, "Timmy, why are you and BFR late?" Timmy says he couldn't run as fast or something. My dad then comes over and says, "Timmy, this is unacceptable and if I let you get away with this, then it'll set a bad example for the rest of the men." My dad then tells Timmy, "You and your BFR are getting too friendly and you're missing roll call because of it. It's time for you to break up with your BFR and do a more important task." My dad instructs Timmy to go set his BFR free into the wild and come back with a push broom. Timmy runs over to a field about 200 yards away and sets the BFR down and then grabs a nearby broom and comes back. My dad says, "Top, do you see all this sunshine on the sidewalks?" Top says, "Yes, sir, I do. It's a damn shame." My dad looks at Timmy standing there with a new broom and he says, "Timmy, today I need you to sweep all this goddamn sunshine off the sidewalks. Don't come out to the field until it's done." Timmy starts sweeping the sidewalks and my dad and the rest of the men go out into the field to do training or something. Later that evening, about 10 hours later, they are coming back and Timmy is pushing a block of wood on the sidewalk. He had swept so much that the bristles had worn off. It was dusk or close to it and some of the sidewalk had a shadow from the nearby buildings cast on it. My dad says, "Timmy, outstanding work, fall in." Timmy never lodged another complaint after that and eventually got kicked out of the army for sleeping on the lawn of the barracks from drinking. I guess 2 strikes for that and you're done, at least back then. TLDR, Army stuff. Thieves think they're stealthy, stole a little more than they bargained for. Tales from a laundromat. Let up story here, I'll be brief. I recently moved and needed a job so I took an easy and quick one at a laundromat. It was really chill most of the time, but during Sundays it would get exceptionally busy. Most customers were honest, simple people just wanting to get their clothes done. I mainly worked the counter and occasionally we would have people drop off clothes for a wash and fold service. And those are normally timed orders so it could get busy, especially if you were the only one working. There was one trouble lady who had 3 unruly kids. She would often just drop them off at the laundromat and use it as free daycare more or less. Management wouldn't do anything about it. Normally I wouldn't mind except these kids had sticky fingers and would steal things mostly for the sake of stealing. Normally it was random stuff like paper chips or tacks or trinkets. One day they decided to try and take some merchandise, fidget spinners, toys, etc. Management decided to put behind an unlocked display case. Not my choice. It's hard enough to keep an eye on everything. Long story short, it was busy and I couldn't watch everything and they stole like $30 of stuff. I caught them later and when I brought it up to the mother she denied it and got very defensive. She complained to my higher up and I got reprimanded for offending a regular customer. Well, the story doesn't end there. I learned a little later she would instruct the kids to go steal soap from people to wash her clothes. I tried to be sympathetic and think maybe she was just in a tough situation, but the way she carried herself has this aura of arrogance around her. She started stealing soap after I caught her kids, so I started getting a small bottle of Gain and putting it on a work cart. Slightly hidden but still visible. I kept it about 1/2 to 1/3 of the way full. I would watch her kids and their patterns, and without a doubt one kid would go hit a game machine we had there. Old arcade type. The woman herself would cause problems over something petty or small, usually not enough suds in her machine, or dust, or something sticky on a table somewhere. While she was talking, the smallest kid would run down an aisle and screech. So you would naturally turn that way. The middle kid would act like he was going to the bathroom. It passes by the work cart, and when the little kid screamed, he would dart over, grab the soap and put it in his mom's purse. Then if she was complaining about the suds, she would casually walk over and grab her purse, grab the stolen soap out and complain that she had to waste more of her hard-earned soap because the machine was bad. Then when it started sudsing up, she would have the biggest grin on her face. Well, this is where the revenge comes in. I knew from previous experience with her family that they do laundry every Sunday, but they skip the third Sunday in a cycle and double up on the fourth. So regular, none, double. I let them steal the decoy Gain on the 2 regular shifts. Financed by my money, not the store's. The fourth Sunday I prepared a special bottle of Gain. I took a little water and cornstarch and mixed it with concentrated bleach to thicken it up a bit so it was more like Gain. I wanted to dye it to match color, but no bleach. The first 2 batches didn't go well, but the third one was slightly goopy, not quite the consistency of Gain, but thick enough to kinda not feel so liquidy. I put some spray to sorta mask the scent a little, as bleach was strong. Sure enough, they came in that Sunday. The bottle was planted. Her kids did the usual routine, and they grabbed the bottle of goopy bleach. She went about her normal routine, complaining about the suds in the washer again. Then she grabbed the bleach and emptied it in her double load of colored clothes. I said, "Oh, clear Gain, that's odd." Her responded, "It's a special type, one brought it from home." Defensively, of course. I said, "That's interesting." With a sly grin on my face, at least I hope that's how it looked. She tossed the empty bottle on top of the washer without a care in the world. 30 minutes later, all the clothes are absolutely ruined. I mean, bleach stains on most everything. Colors blending. It was a mess. She is of course up in arms, blaming the machine. I grabbed the bottle, smell it and go, "I think that special Gain must have had bleach in it." It hits her. She expressly said she brought it from home. She either admits to stealing or admits to bleaching her own clothes. She naturally accuses me, but as it was fairly busy that day, a few customers remembered her tirade and expressly saying she brought it from home. The higher-up denied to pay for damages to the clothes. I did feel bad. It must have been $500 or so of ruined clothes. TLDR, customer is rude, thief. Trick her into ruining her own clothes. Edit, $ error and some spelling. Wife cheats on her husband, abuses their children and lies on court. Enjoy not having your kids anymore. Good day. You know the deal. English not first language. Mobile yada yada. It's also my first post, so be gentle please. For cast we have mom, empty human, sister, me, and my dad. I have no concrete dialogue for this story since it happened about 4 years ago, and I pretty much want to forget about it. Now, some background. My mother is not exactly the best person in the world. She used to abuse me and both physically and mentally, mostly mentally. Avoid responsibilities at home, and she also decided to cheat on my dad with several men around 13 years ago. And never stop. When my father discovered this, he simply stopped sleeping in the same room and stopped being affectionate towards her. He stayed with her for us and I, and decided to raise us basically alone since mom was always outside with her partners. My mother used to simply arrive home to eat, sleep, and hurt me or my ass. The rest of the day she claimed to be working overtime. However, all the money she made was kept away for herself, and my father had to do real overtime to take care of us. And he was tired of not getting any help. Here is where my dad's revenge plan starts. He stayed quiet for a long time, managing work and parenting very well. But in the meantime, he was collecting all the evidence he could about my mom cheating, as well as evidence of abuse towards and I. And he also kept supporting us, teaching us how to stand up for ourselves and each other, helping us understand how bad mom's behavior was, and we don't need to justify her bad treatment just for being out mother. He kept being the best person he could for about 10 years until and I were old enough to testify in court. Then he immediately asked for divorce, and got it very easily since mom kept lying about how he was abusing me and my children, but Of course, he had proof of her cheating and being the abuser, so they got divorced. But the plan didn't end there. Since he wanted us to live with him, my dad left our house immediately after the divorce, and 2 weeks later I moved with him. My sister stayed with mom. Let's skip some months until the court date to discuss the kids' custody. About 6 months prior, my mother lied about me living with her so she could get that sweet child support check *. But when the court date arrived, S and me testified against her, explained how bad of a mother she was, etc. And I said that I have been living with my dad for months. Contrary to what my mother has said. Of course she wanted to play the victim with lies, which we refuted. The judge was not having it, and told her that she needed to stop lying because she was being fined for lying to a judicial authority. Of course she lost our custody and she was forced to return the child support money to us. Now she lives alone and sometimes tries to play the "forgive me, I know I did wrong" card with us, only to ask for money right after. But none of us want to see her again. Not exactly a massive, sweet and evil revenge, but after I told my dad about this sub, he told me I should post the story. I hope it actually belongs here. Asterisk the child support thing, in my country. When parents divorce, it's the other parent who gives the money to the one with custody of the children. We call that money child support, but in this case where both parent have only one children at their care, they get nothing from each other. My mom said she had both of us to get money from my dad, but that was a lie. Edit, this post is still small but I'm reading the comments to my father and he loves all the support. He is really happy with you guys. Thanks a lot for that. Lightning strikes. First time poster. This occurred in an auto body, mechanic, towing shop. Owner got a call about a tractor-trailer combo that tried to turn around in a schoolyard and busted the trailer hitch. Owner brought the trailer back to the shop and found the parts. It was an old army hitch and finding the parts took 2 trips to town, 40 miles away. Repairs took the best part of 2 days. The company was based out of Colorado, aka Not So Nice Western Lumber Company, and when owner finished the repairs and called the lumber company boss, who said, "Just bill us and we'll send you a check." 2 weeks later, owner got a check for 1/2 of the billing, marked paid in full. 3 years later, in winter, owner heard a bang out on the highway and a tractor-trailer unit coasted to a stop into owner's parking lot. The name on the door, Not So Nice Western Lumber out of Colorado. The driver couldn't understand it. The engine was running, kinda, but it wouldn't pull. Owner finally found out the crankshaft had broken right in a main bearing between 3 and 4 cylinder. The front half was running but not the back. Owner pulled tractor into the shop, let the driver stay there in the sleeper cab while the company sent out a mechanic. Young guy, knew his stuff, pulled the crank, replaced it and all the bearing, etc. Tractor was ready, owner was, too. Company was called and the lumber company boss said, "Just bill us." Owner declined. Cash up front. The bill was horrendous, towing, use of the shop for 13 days, tools, phone, etc. The lumber company boss asked if this had anything to do with the previous affair. Owner replied, "Of course not." Lots of phone calls between the mechanic and lumber company boss. The trailer, by the way, was parked out front with some 2x8s under the dolly as the ground was wet and soft. The mechanic, laden with instructions and overloading his ass, goes out to the tractor, starts it up, and runs it up under the trailer but, in a hurry, forgot to connect the air hoses and set the trailer brakes. He hits the 5th wheel fast, bumps the trailer off the 2x8s and sinks the dolly in the soft ground. Owner parks our big tow truck crossways in front of his tractor. That unit is not going anywhere. Owner locks the tow truck, pats his .38 in his belt, smiles at the mechanic and walks inside. Lots of phone calls occur. Cashier's check arrives. TLDR, karma is a itch. Former nerd destroys bully's life. This is a story about my older sister. My sister is a super kind and smart person. In high school, she was a typical nerd. Never really cared about her clothes really and stuck to her studies and extracurricular. Her general style was pulling her hair in a ponytail, jeans, shirt and sweater, jacket. In her class, there were a group of popular girls that made it their life job to make my sister's life miserable. Think real-life Mean Girls, Regina George and all. Every time I talked to her about it, I could tell in her eyes it hurt her, but she just told me she was okay and she'll just keep ignoring them. One day, Regina and her minions spread a rumor about my sister being a slut, telling everyone she acts innocent but has actually slept with a bunch of guys and even hit on teachers. This rumor spread to all of the students and the staff. I texted my sister when I heard about it and she told me she was fine, but when I saw her at home later that night, It was obvious she had been crying. The school called my parents about the whole ordeal. The administration knew that it was all BS, but still had to investigate since it involved teachers. My sister and even the administration knew who would spread this kind of rumor. But there was no proof since it was all word of mouth. The teachers knew that those group of girls were not nice, but they never did anything this messed up before. My sister confronted Regina and all she said was, "You are a loser and losers deserve a crappy life. Deal with it." My sister went on to graduate as the class valedictorian and went to Cambridge in the UK for her undergraduate and graduated magna cum laude edit, or the equivalent of top of the class, and then went to Harvard Law. She worked for a few years at some big law firm but eventually started her own practice back in the area we grew up in with her now husband. One day she gets a mother and her daughter into her office and asks about suing the landlord of the apartment complex the mother was living in. They said that the premises have not been upkept, has hazardous living conditions and repairs are rarely done, and when they are done, they're not done well. For example, when a water pipe burst, the plumber didn't replace any of the old pipes and instead just patched with adhesives like duct tape and Gorilla Tape because to fully repair the ordeal would take a few days, so the management company just patched it up. My sister goes on to find out that the management company is owned none other than by Regina's family and that the complex had been falling apart ever since Regina's father retired and Regina decided to take over despite not knowing how to run the company. Over the course of a few months, my sister found out that it was not just this one complex but 3 out of the 4 complexes the company managed were in terrible condition, and my sister's firm was able to get about 60% of the residents to file for a class action lawsuit. The list of things that were messed up in these places was astronomical. The fire sprinkler system didn't work. A huge backlog of repairs needed to be done in the apartments. Signs of mold were even sprouting in certain areas with more moisture. And rodent infestation. The only thing they didn't have were termites. On top of that, there were reports of multiple break-ins in the complexes as the security contractors were no longer working for them. Everything was documented with pictures, police reports and sworn witness statements from current and previous tenants, contractors previously hired, previous employees, and expert witnesses. The case mounted against Regina's company was basically ironclad. My sister never forgot that rumor, and if there was even an opportune moment for her to get back at Regina, it would be now, so my sister made it her mission to get anything and everything out of Regina for wronging these people. Initially, Regina's attorneys wanted to settle out of court, but since Regina was stubborn and also not too bright, she didn't want to settle and decided to fight back. As the defendant, Regina's claim was that all of the problems were caused by the plaintiffs and they were trying to fraud her. Case eventually went to trial. Despite Regina's attorney wanting to settle out of court, on the first day of court, my sis was nervous about Regina recognizing her. However, it seemed like Regina didn't remember her at all. Throughout the trial, my sister's firm produced expert witness after expert witness about how all the damage to the property was caused by negligence and any repairs that were done were not done properly. Former employees testified how Regina cut costs by reducing critical maintenance staff and expecting the leftover staff to take care of everything. When they couldn't keep up with the backlog, she fired the people and hired unqualified replacements. The only complex that was maintained well was the one she lived in, and she spared no expense to remodel her unit with new appliances and luxuries, and also had a bunch of her friends live there too, either discounted heavily or free. At the end of the trial, Regina was found guilty on all accounts and ordered to fix everything or the complexes will be shut down. The judge also ordered that no one was allowed to live there while the repairs were being made, so she had to pay for all of the current tenants' relocation to hotels and the repairs for an entire month. There were over 300 residents. The costs for everything would cost Regina over $2 million. Assuming they don't find more things wrong and need to extend the repairs. If she had just settled with the plaintiffs in the beginning, it would have cost her less than $500,000. Regina broke down outside of the courthouse and was screaming at her attorneys. When she caught sight of my sister, she ran over and started screaming obscenities at her. My sister put up a hand to quiet her and said to her face, "You are a loser, and losers deserve a crappy life. Deal with it," and walked away. Regina's face got bright red for a moment and then the light bulb finally went off. As she realized who my sister is, the same nerd girl she bullied and has now destroyed her life. Edit, told to her by colleagues as they witnessed it. Aftermath. Regina's dad had zero idea of what was going on. After he retired, he moved out of the country to live abroad, and by the time he found out the company he built was falling apart, It was a bit too late. He eventually came back to fire Regina and re-establish his company and hired the right people to run the company.